This program airs statewide on California Public Television and is a California's Gold classic. This series is endorsed by the California Teachers Association, the California School Boards Association, and the California Library Association. Hello everybody, I'm Huell, and here we are on a beautiful day right in the middle of Hollywood. In fact, Hollywood Boulevard is right out there. Now we have come to one of the most historic places in Hollywood. This is Grauman's Egyptian Theater. And this theater, when it opened back in 1922, had the distinction of being the first honest-to-goodness movie palace in Hollywood. In fact, it predated Grauman's Chinese Theater by almost 5 years. Now, this was the place, starting in the 1920s, where all the major stars would come in and out. They had all kind of world premiere movies here. This was a hotbed. Lots of activity here, and in 1922 they also discovered King Tut's tomb in Egypt. So the motif of this theater, the Egyptian motif, was very much the rage of the country. This was an icon in Hollywood. This was a hotbed of activity all through the 20s, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and then in the 1960s, for a variety of reasons, the theater kind of started to go down until in 1992, helped of course by a major earthquake, this theater literally shut down. It ceased to exist. It was literally falling apart. The Egyptian theater, for all practical purposes, was gone. But now, in 1999, the theater is back, thanks to a lot of people connected with the city of Los Angeles and an organization called American Cinematheque, which show a lot of art films and wonderful foreign films. The theater is back in all of its glory. In fact, it's as beautiful as it ever was. And this theater has become a real success story. It's an example of something that was here, went away, and has come back, which by coincidence just happens to be the theme of this particular adventure, because we're getting ready to visit 3 other places in California that were here, went away, and now have come back. And if you're curious about where we're going to go and what we're going to find that has come back, well, as always, you're invited to come along with us as we all continue our search together for California's gold. Our first destination, Marshall Gold Discovery State Historic Park, located in the little community of Coloma. Now this has to be one of the prettiest little places in our state. It's also one of the most historic, because it was here over 150 years ago that old James Marshall spotted something shiny on the ground, leaned over, picked it up, and ended up discovering gold. And that single gold nugget, said to be about half the size of a pea, literally changed the course of history. Now this is going to be interesting because I'm standing here with old James Marshall himself. This is his friend, Peter Wimmer, who at the time, back in 1848, was supervising all the Indians who were working here at Sutter's mill. And James, it was January 1848, you and your friend Peter Wimmer were walking down here in the tailings of the mill. You saw something glistening in the sun. You leaned over and picked it up, and what did you think?
I didn't know what to think, except I thought it was gold because I had some schooling of geology back in 5th grade private education in New Jersey. So I knew that if gold would be really gold, it would be soft and malleable. So I knelt down and I put it on a flat rock and I pounded it with another round rock, and it sort of shattered like the shape of a regular shaped coin. I was convinced it was gold. So I went over to where the boys were having breakfast and I asked asked Peter and the Mormons if they'd seen something like that. Well, one of them had a $5 gold piece he took out of his pocket and compared the taste and the texture, and he was convinced it was gold. Another one put it on an anvil, he pounded it down, and he pretty much did the same test I'd done on the river. You know, he pounded it down, it didn't shatter like sulfur to copper. Instead, it just flattened.
So you ran 3 or 4 tests on it right away.
Exactly.
Now let's show that this is kind of about the size of what you found. What was
About
it?
half the size of a pea.
About half the size of a pea. But your ultimate test, and this is where this interesting bit of history comes in, a little known part of history, the definitive test that you had made to decide whether you had really found gold or not, let's walk over here, took place right over here in this cabin. Now, tell us who we're getting ready to meet, James.
Wimmer, have you seen something that looked like this before? I heard you worked in the George fields in Georgia, in the gold fields in Georgia.
Well, I did. When we were running our boarding house, I went out and prospected in the gold fields, and this kind of looks like gold. So I know that if you put it in the lye pot, when you're making lye soap, it will disintegrate if it's not gold, and I just happen to be making soap today. So I'll put it in the lye pot and we'll see what happens.
Now wait a minute, don't put it in yet. We hadn't gotten up to that point yet, because the whole idea is that this is Mrs. Wimmer, you're Peter's wife. These are your 2 children. You came with him up here when he was supervising the mill.
Right.
You're the only woman in camp, right?
I'm the only woman in camp. I'm here because they needed someone to cook, and I was married to Peter, so we came as a family, and I'm doing the cooking.
Okay, and because you were from Georgia and you had seen gold in Georgia, you're the only person here who really knows what raw gold looks like.
I've seen raw gold in the gold fields of Georgia. Our family went out and prospected, and we collected gold in Georgia.
So when James Marshall came over and handed you this little speck of gold, what he thought was gold, here we're going to reenact it here. This is living history going berserk here. We've got a kettle going. We don't have lye because this is a state historic park now.
Right.
We don't want lye boiling.
Lye is really caustic.
Yeah.
I have a stick that you would stir your lye soap with the stick. You wouldn't.
And what did you do? Just throw it in? Let's throw it in.
Throw it in.
She threw it in and she...
Gold will sink to the bottom. You stir it around. Now the next step is to, when the lye soap is ready, you pour it into a form. It makes a brick. After Jenny made the brick of lye soap, the next day they were busy making breakfast, and one of the men said, "What about that piece of stuff we found? Is it still in the soap?" So they had to take the soap out of the form, and they started cutting it apart, looking for the piece of gold.
And at some point they found it inside the piece of lye soap that you had made.
Right.
And what did you tell the men at that point?
I believe it's gold.
It had changed a brighter hue, but it didn't destroy it like we would have suspected had it not been gold. So I figured my partner John had to know about this, so then I put it in my bandana and I rode off for New Helvetia to show John to make some more tests.
So,
conclusive tests.
Let's recreate that exact moment. Come on in here, fellas. These are the guys that Mrs. Wimmer would have been cooking for. That's a motley looking crew of workers over here.
Well, they'd had a hard life before they got here. Most of them had walked west to fight in the war, so they were a kind of a motley looking crew when they got here. They didn't have their women with them, so they weren't keeping them in line either.
All right, let's recreate that exact moment. And fellas, we want a sufficient amount of enthusiasm when she announces that this is in fact gold that she's got in the middle of her lye soap here. What was it you said, Jenny, to everyone who was assembled?
I believe we found gold, and this piece in the soap is gold.
We found gold!
Yeah, gold! There must be more around here if we found some.
Okay, we found gold, and here come the Wimmers. And boy, they just keep on coming, too. Now, in the spirit of recreating history, what we have done is invited the descendants of Jenny and Peter Wimmer to come back to the place where all of this happened in Coloma. And who is the spokesperson for this family here? Come on out here. These are all Wimmers?
Yes, Wimmers, and are there a few husbands stuck and wives here too?
Okay,
And
well that's okay. They married into the Wimmer
They
family.
did.
And how aware is the Wimmer family of the role that Jenny played in the discovery of gold here in California?
We're all very aware of Jenny's
you?
historical significance. Yes, we are.
Okay, and the story is that she boiled it down in that lye soap. Is that the story that you all tell?
Yes.
Are there other stories that are going around?
About the first nugget?
Yeah.
Oh, lots of stories.
Uh-huh.
And there are lots of people telling the story of the first nugget.
Uh-huh.
But the one that we saw today, the one that's up at Bancroft called the Wimmer Nugget, is the one she wore in a little leather pouch around her neck for years. And Marshall gave that to her.
Okay, you gave that away. That was going to be our big secret. Come on in here. Here's the guy. You are the director of the Bancroft.
I am.
At UC Berkeley.
That's right.
And here is your security guy from the police department at UC Berkeley with his black satchel. And you've come all the way over here from Berkeley today.
That's right.
And in that black satchel you brought, and let's put this out here because this is amazing, tell us what we have here.
What we have here is the Wimmer Nugget. This is the nugget that belonged to Jenny and Peter Wimmer, and that was sold about 3 times before it arrived in the Bancroft Library in about 1927 or 1928.
And this is the nugget that she wore around her neck?
Right, in a little leather pouch.
But now, was this the first piece of gold found in California up here at Sutter's Mill?
There's where the controversy comes in.
I knew there was going to be a controversy.
Because there is my understanding is that the piece of gold that was first discovered was half the size of a pea.
And this is bigger than a pea.
This is bigger than a pea. Now there is a piece in the Smithsonian Institution which the Smithsonian claims is the original first gold nugget. But I'm quite convinced that this is the nugget that Mrs. Wimmer boiled in the lye and that
now,
she had.
Come over here, Mrs. Wimmer. You can tell. You remember what it looked like. You think that's it?
Well, it looks like it could have a little lye even left on it. Maybe that's quartz mixed in. But yeah, it looks like the piece I wore around my neck and had in the lye pot.
Really?
Sure
now,
does.
is this out for public display at the Bancroft?
Yes, it is.
And how is it identified in the case at the Bancroft?
Well, we have a scrapbook with the original affidavits from Jenny and Peter Wimmer that swear that this is the original gold nugget that James Marshall gave to Mrs. Wimmer in 1848.
And what do you think?
I'm convinced that it is.
Wow. Yeah. And you're convinced?
Yes, I know it's true.
And what about the Wimmer family? Are you convinced this is it?
That's it.
That's it.
Heck yeah.
Too bad there wasn't more of that gold to spread around to the Wimmer family. Oh, okay. Well, wait a minute. You're one of the descendants. You can hold this thing. Watch out. Security is watching every move you make.
Don't worry, Kelsey.
This is very interesting because what we have done in our living history quest here today is to reunite the Wimmer family with Coloma, with Sutter's Mill, with the original piece of gold that really probably hasn't been here in Coloma in 150 years.
That's right.
Since you first found it.
Well,
So maybe you should hold it.
I found it in the soap. I boiled it
Well,
in
James,
the soap.
you come over here too.
James picked it up. Does that look like the one you picked up?
I picked up a few pebbles. It could be one of them.
Yeah.
Well, don't put doubt on it now.
Oh,
We've
but
gone
it
too
ain't-
far.
It ain't. Like I say, the
But
first piece is about half the size of a pea, but we brought some other pebbles on account of my hat. You know, it very likely was the very first one.
The point is, the gold, the first piece of gold, or certainly one of the first pieces of gold found up here in what is now known as Gold Country, has come home. It's back with the Wimmer family where it belongs. It's one of the richest agricultural areas in our state. Huge amounts of acreage, growing all sorts of things, from cotton to alfalfa to barley to fruits and vegetables. Located about halfway between San Francisco and Los Angeles, the southern San Joaquin Valley is a remarkable place, a real agricultural success story. Now, we'd been invited to visit this area by Rob Hansen, who's a professor at the College of the Sequoias. He had heard that we were looking for examples of things that had once been here, had gone away, and had now come back. And after meeting up with him on the side of the road, we followed him down a couple of miles of dusty road to the place he wanted to take us. And when we got there, we were in for a real surprise. Well, this is very exciting. We are actually walking out in this water because this is very historic water. What this isn't, though, is a real lake, right?
Well, it's a lake basin, and in unusual years, very wet years here in the valley, this fills up with water again. And this is the first time since 1983 where there's been so much water that's come down into the valley that they've had to turn it loose out on this farmland in the old Tulare Lake bed.
Tulare Lake.
That's right.
That's what this was. What's
Right.
the history of Tulare Lake?
Well, it's hard to imagine for most Californians because many people don't travel through this part of the state. But there was in historic times up until 1898 was a body of water out here that was very broad but very shallow.
Now, how big are we talking about?
Well, the average dimension given prior to settlement was about 760 square miles.
760 square miles.
Right.
So it was a huge lake.
It was the standard line given is that it was the largest freshwater lake in surface area this side of the Great Lakes, this side of the Mississippi. You know, when you look at maps of the U.S., Salt Lake is there, but that's a salty lake, and the lakes that are in our desert are also salty lakes. But Tulare Lake was a big, broad, very, very shallow freshwater lake here in the Central Valley.
And in the early years, the Native Americans would be out on this lake fishing.
Sure. We're not seeing that today, but the shore of the lake was fringed with a marsh vegetation of a plant called tule. That's the plant that gives the lake its name. The proper pronunciation is probably tulare. And the tules that grew around the lake were what they made their watercraft out of. They were called tule balsas, and the tule stems are very buoyant, and they could literally paddle miles out into this lake to fish, to hunt for ducks. These were very buoyant watercraft that they used.
All right, here's the tip-off. Here's it looks like the way Louie's been shooting it, that we're out in the lake, that there's a lake here.
Sure.
But now we'll give it away. We're actually at the end of a road here. This road goes right down here. There's a stop sign right over there. We're actually in an area that has been flooded.
Sure. Yeah, we're on Pueblo Avenue, just west of the town of Corcoran, and just like when the area flooded in 1983, all this land here went underwater and roads are closed, and as of right now, there are about 100 square miles of farmland underwater out here. About I can't compute it exactly, but it's over 10 miles on a side, so there's over 100 square miles of farmland flooded right now.
So basically, in a nutshell, what happened was this lake was here for hundreds of years.
Sure.
And then it disappeared in...
Since settlement, since Western settlement, since the 1850s.
It just disappeared, it shrunk, and finally went away.
Right. As we began doing farming along the east side of the valley, the water that used to flow across to fill this lake, we began using that water for irrigation on the east side, and as we took that water out to use for all the crops on the other side of the valley, the amount of water coming here decreased until the lake eventually disappeared. By 1898 was the first year of record where it was gone.
Gone completely.
Before the turn of the century, before dams,
levees.
That's right. All those things. This was just sort of like slowly turning off the tap, and so as a functioning natural system, it's been gone for just a year short of a century now.
Well, it was gone, but now it's back.
That's right.
Which is a real testament to Mother Nature and the power of nature and of water, that this much water could be back again.
Yeah, it is. It's since I've been in the valley, this is the second big flood. 1969, to many of the locals, was the big flood, but then in 1982 and 83, that was when we had our record rain and snowfall in California history. And when that occurred, this thing covered 160 square miles, and that had, you know, devastating impacts on all the farming operations out here, just as this will do now probably for a year. There will be no crops on this.
So this
on
is
farmland.
actually, when this dries out, this is all farmland.
That's right.
Active,
That's
growing farmland.
That's right. It's mostly cotton and grain like barley and safflower and seed alfalfa. Those are the four main crops out here on the lake
Is that
bottom.
a farm building out there?
It's a cotton gin. As far as I know, it hasn't been operational for a while. That was one of the buildings that also got flooded in the '83 flood. Right now, it's probably about the only place you could find any bass out here. It's about the only shade. The fishermen tell me that that's probably the only place where there's many fish in one spot out in the lake right now.
Well, there wouldn't be fish here because this isn't normally a lake.
Well, the way it works, because these waters are coming from the foothills of the Sierra, once the dams begin making releases, any of the fish up in those streams come in here. There's already minnows and tadpoles in here and smaller fish, and depending on how long the water stays here, they'll reproduce, and there will be a fish population of some size in here.
What's interesting, though, is that we are literally recreating. We are standing here now and looking out at what the Native Americans and the early citizens of California, the early settlers, would have seen if they had been in this section of the San Joaquin Valley.
That's right. We're actually far enough out from the old lakeshore that we would probably be underwater with the original lake. We're quite close to the deepest part of the lake here, but the actual shore would have still been some miles back to the east of where we are right now.
Is that because this is a very low part of the state? This is a natural place for water to come.
Right. Many people talk of the Central Valley as being just two parts, the Sacramento Valley and the San Joaquin Valley, but this southern part of the San Joaquin is truly a separate hydrological basin. It's low enough, and for a number of reasons, the waters, rather than making their way to the delta, these waters originally formed into this big freshwater shallow lake here.
You know, it's hard to describe what this feels like, but to stand here and realize that this is all farmland, that this was once a lake, and then to get the feeling of what it must have been like here in California on this spot hundreds of years ago, it really is, in a way, kind of a moving experience, isn't it?
It's hard to imagine, and unfortunately it changed so fast that we don't have very many detailed descriptions of what it was like in its early state. Much of what we have available in the historic record are sort of, you know, little stories in newspapers and things passed down through families, but there was never any sort of thorough study of the lake as
people took it for granted. They thought it was always going to be here. Now, will this just gradually shrink and disappear?
Well, it's right now, I guess you'd have to lay odds on exactly what's going to happen. If you look to where the snow cap is, the snow on the top of the Sierra, there is way over normal snowpack right now. It's the numbers I've heard are somewhere in the range of 200% of normal, which means that all that water is still on its way down here. This is the bottom of the valley, and this is where that water ultimately would go without the kind of water distribution system that's here now. And so, as things stand now, I've been told that there is more water being pumped out and evaporating than is flowing in here now. So it's beginning to shrink again and get smaller, but it's anybody's guess as to what will happen between now and, say, July or August.
But it will disappear eventually.
Yes.
But then, sometime in the future, it will come back again.
Well, I would imagine so. Every time it has flooded, we have more and more engineering options to store and move and capture that water to keep it from flooding the farmland. But when all this came down, it was just so much coming with the rest of the state so wet that there was nowhere to move that volume of water fast enough to keep it out of here. You know,
So you're saying it's going to come back again someday?
I would have to imagine it would. You know, I mean, try as we might, this is nature, and it's a powerful force.
Well, there it is, Tulare Lake. It was here for hundreds of years. It was gone for 100 years. It comes back every 20 or 30 years, and then goes away, and then comes back again. Well, we end our adventure here in downtown Los Angeles on Angel's Flight. Now, Angel's Flight started back in 1901. It was the dream of Colonel Eddy, and he established this little railroad. It was billed the shortest railroad in the world. It's a funicular railroad. It ran until 1969. It was a fixture here in Los Angeles. People used to ride up and down Bunker Hill on this little Angel's Flight, and everybody in the city of Los Angeles loved it. In 1969, because of redevelopment, Angel's Flight was dismantled and put in storage, and the city promised that it would be back in a few years. Well, that few years turned into 25 years, because it wasn't until 1996 that Los Angeles's beloved Angel's Flight returned to its proper place in the texture and fabric of this city. But Angel's Flight is a perfect example of something that was here, went away, and has come back. And I hope you've enjoyed our particular adventure as we've traveled all over California in search of other such things. We visited the Egyptian Theater, we visited Tulare Lake, which has come back and now it's gone again, and of course we saw the old Wimmer Nugget, which came back to Coloma for a day. That's it. I hope you enjoyed our adventure. Angel's Flight is emptying out. We're leaving too. But as always, you're invited to join us again next time as we continue our search together for California's gold. Come on, the train's heading up. We're getting off. Okay. Goodbye, everybody. Well, hello everybody, I'm Huell Hauser, and I sure hope you enjoyed this adventure. If you'd like to see it again or share it with your family or friends, or perhaps donate a copy to your local school or library, it's available on video cassette and on DVD. All you have to do is call 1-800-266-5727 and we'll be glad to send it to you right away.